Waziri, do you take responsibility for the continued incarceration of Dr. Kizza Besigye in a Ugandan jail?
No, I do not. I don't take responsibility, and Kenya cannot take responsibility, because that is a process that is going on in Uganda under the authority of the government of Uganda. So we cannot take responsibility for that.
Please explain the circumstances under which he got to that jail, because he was here.
I think it's best left as it is now, because he came here, as you know, and there were issues, and he had to go.
What issues?
I think the manner in which he had come to Kenya were not quite clear.
What do you mean by that?
And at that time, him being here, and then, of course, certain issues beginning to evolve. And I think, as I say, I would rather leave it at that. Okay. Because he's now in the custody of his nation and his authorities.
What do you mean by the manner in which he came into the country was not proper? I mean, I'm trying to establish to what extent, the Kenyan government was involved in him being handed over to the Ugandan authorities.
Normally, the reality is that we always look at what is a national interest. And I think we need to appreciate that we have to partner with our East African states. And sometimes we have to manage those relations very carefully for the broader national interest. Now, it is important that as we do whatever we do, even as individuals, we must be cognizant that there's a nation, and nations have relationships. And these are the issues that are not unique to what is happening in the East African community or East African region. We now must look at even the geopolitics and the debate around immigration and movement of people. This is a debate that is broader, and it's taking very different dimensions globally.
Okay, I want us to stick to the Kizza Besigye issue. What are the specific circumstances around that? Waziri, why don't you just admit that Kenya handed over Dr. Kizza Besigye to the Ugandan authorities?
Kenya cooperated with the Ugandan authorities. If there are issues, it's a friendly nation. If there are issues that they feel require attention, because he was not seeking asylum. He had not come to say that he is seeking asylum. Had he said that, maybe the treatment would have been different.
On what intelligence
was that? I will not be at liberty to disclose that.
So you won't disclose
no.
the reasons why?
No.
So, Waziri, your statement is talking about managing relationship between countries. Some might interpret that to mean that it is that overrides the rights and freedoms of movement, of speech, of the individuals of the East African community. And that in that way, then, would be the same justification for the Kenyans who were deported from Tanzania? Are you saying the rights of leaders and the relationship
not of leaders, not leaders,
supersedes those of individuals and their rights to free movement?
No, let's put it this way. Please, let's look at it in a proper context. Let's not simplify some of these things to make it look like, or rather trivialize some of these issues. Uganda is Kenya's largest trading partner. A lot of lives, a lot of jobs are dependent on that relationship. The same goes with Tanzania. So we have to be cognizant of the national interests. What would happen to Kenya's economy if there was no more trade between Kenya and Uganda?
would Kizza Besigye's stay in the country have jeopardized the trade relations? It's a fair question, following up from what you've just said. Do you think Dr. Kizza Besigye's stay in the country, is that what you're saying, jeopardized the trade relations between Kenya and Uganda? In the same light, Waziri, do you think that Hanifa Adan, Hussein Khalid, former Chief Justice, Martha Karua, and Boniface Mwangi and their presence in Tanzania jeopardizes trade between Kenya and Tanzania?
I think there are some issues that we have to be careful about. We talked about this national interest, and I'm repeating. I have, as Minister for Foreign Affairs, as much as I have to take care of Kenyans in an individual capacity, I equally have that all-important responsibility to make sure that the national interests of Kenya are not jeopardized. And this is absolutely essential for the well-being of Kenya.
So where is the balance between the steps that you are taking? Because, Waziri, throughout our conversation, you speak about, the broader relationships. But some would say, Waziri, what steps are you taking to protect the rights and welfare of Kenyans in the country, in the region, their rights and their welfare, whom you have sworn to protect?
We take diplomatic measures. We communicate diplomatically. Now, Yvonne, do you want these incidents to escalate tension between our two countries? Or should we handle them diplomatically? If you ask me, we should not escalate the situation. We should handle it diplomatically. And that is what I intend to do. But it would be tactless if I went head on and said, I want a confrontation with our neighbors on this issue.
I'm not asking for a confrontation. So, perhaps to just ask.
So I've told you that.
To what extent you're able to protect the rights of Kenyans?
To the extent that is legally possible. That is how we go about it.
Let's stay within, as I said, the wider East African region. Waziri, a parallel government was formed in Nairobi in February, or was it March this year, by the RSF. Is Kenya's government officially recognizing RSF as the legitimate government of Sudan?
First of all, I want to make it very clear that you are wrong. No government was formed in Kenya. No government in exile was formed in Kenya.
What was RSF doing here then, Waziri?
They were having their peace conversation.
With who?
Amongst themselves. Okay. Amongst themselves.
There's a question here, because there's many sides to the crisis in Sudan.
Correct.
So far, Waziri, we've only seen one side.
Are you sure Burhan was not here?
Making extensive trips. Hang on one second. Hang on one second. With the RSF, and they've been here in the country not once, not twice, and not at a private installation, but they've been at the KICC. So what you're saying is RSF will be here. What about the others? Are they here meeting independently of the others?
Shall I tell you that personally, the Minister of SAF, Foreign Affairs, Yusuf of Sudan, he came, he saw me, and we went to State House and he met the President of the Republic of Kenya. He's from the other side, this year.
So why do you think, the government of Sudan is quite unhappy then with the presence of RSF here?
You know, it's completely misplaced in my view. We are very clear that the solution in Sudan is not going to be a military solution. It has to be dialogue. They have been fighting for the last 3 years, going into 3 years. There are different initiatives that are being put forward by different people. If you follow carefully, there's a process that they call the Jeddah process. It is being pushed by the Saudis and other countries. I was in London the other day for another meeting on Sudan, and I was equally at another one in Paris. So, is it wrong if there's a convergence and a conversation on Sudan in Kenya.
Waziri,
Waziri, you have to listen to me.
Waziri, one moment.
Yes.
It wasn't a convergence. It was the RSF here. This was the statement they made right here in the capital of Nairobi. They said, on this anniversary, we proudly declare the establishment of the government of peace and unity, a broad civilian coalition that reflects the true face of Sudan. They say we're not building a parallel state, but we are building the only realistic future for Sudan. Our government, they continue to say, will provide essential services like education, healthcare, and justice. Waziri, that is not a declaration of a parallel government?
No, it was not. If you read the full text of that document, there was no declaration of a government per se. Let me make it very clear. Yes, there was no declaration of a government.
We proudly declare the establishment of the government of peace and unity. Is that not a declaration of government?
Is that a government of Sudan?
It's a...
No.
So what would you call it? If it's not a government of Sudan, then what would you call it?
It is an intention. It is an intention. They will declare peace and they'll pursue peace and security for their country.
Without the other side?
They went back to their country. Follow carefully. They did their pronouncement in Sudan.
But they did it here first?
No. We did not allow, and we will not allow, Kenya to be used for the formation of a government for another country.
All right, but yet there was a protest from the government of General Burhan from Khartoum.
We cannot stop the protest. He is General Burhan. He can raise his concerns. Equally, he's still raising concerns about other countries in other places.
Yeah, but I'm talking about Kenya.
But Kenya is not involved in any negative way with Sudan. Remember, we don't even have a common border. We don't have a common boundary. What we are looking for is, as members of the African Union, as members of IGAD, we wish them well and we want them to engage in dialogue.
Okay.
That is how we are going to get peace.
And this is an IGAD-led process of which Kenya is a part. Does it not worry you from a diplomatic standpoint in terms of even the perception, right, that Kenya seems to have the perception among one side of the warring factions of non-alignment, of specific alignment in one direction? Should Kenya then continue to be party to that? Because it's one thing to say the other side, but you can't ignore the Sudan's government's protest, can you?
Kenya has had a history of mediation. And it will go back, I can take you back, to the very early days of Mzee Jomo Kenyatta. The whole issue of Angola and how they got their independence, the final document was actually in Nakuru, where President Jomo Kenyatta brought the different political factions together. We assisted in South Sudan in bringing in the mediation. They signed their agreement here. And we've kept our tabs on it, the Tumaini process and so forth, trying to help them through mediation. The same has been happening with Somalia. And the same is with Sudan. At no time are we carrying any arms to fight. In fact, one of the tragic things is that Kenyans have been involved in the humanitarian crisis in South Sudan. When the war broke out, a lot of Sudanese were evacuated, and also international members of the international workforce in that place. They were brought to Kenya. So we have played a very positive role. And indeed, some lives of Kenyans have been lost working with UN agencies in Sudan. So we have...
So you still believe that Kenya, particularly in the Sudan issue, holds a neutral arbiter position, despite the fact that one side is raising some very serious objections to the role that Kenya plays?
But that can only be resolved if they talk. We cannot scapegoat. The solution to Sudan remains one. They must sit and dialogue. Blaming Kenya is not going to solve the Sudanese challenge.
But
as they continue blaming Kenya, more people are dying. It would be more important for them to take personal responsibility, own up to the need to discuss, and have a conversation with the Sudanese people. We have been telling them, don't just make it a dialogue of military men. Involve civil society, involve the civilians of Sudan. After all, they are the majority. The armed people are fewer in number, but you are engaging in a process and you are ignoring the bulk of your people.
So, Waziri, now that we're going on the record and getting that straight and taking personal responsibility, do you want to go on record here, Waziri, as saying that you recognize the government of General Burhan as a legitimate government of Sudan?
If you follow carefully, Sudan has been suspended from the African Union because the people in authority are not there through a democratic process.
So you don't recognize the government of General Burhan?
So what I'm trying to tell you is that Sudan has got a lot of work to do. I'm asking
Kenya's standpoint.
What I'm trying to tell you is that right now, the legitimacy of the authorities in Sudan is under audit by the African Union. We are members of the African Union.
So you don't recognize
the
legitimacy?
what we want is for them to come to terms and talk so that we can have peace.
All right. You've talked about Kenya's history with dealing with different warring parties and bringing many countries in the region and beyond. But for years we have dealt with these differing warring parties, but without raising the suspicions that RSF's presence in the country does. And part of that is because of the allegations going around. So we're very pleased to have you here with us to perhaps set the record straight. Waziri, could you confirm to us whether the government of Kenya does any business deals with RSF?
There are no business deals. There are no business deals. Are you in a position to give me evidence?
I'm asking the question.
No, there's none. I'm in government. There's none.
So you don't, as a government, facilitate RSF to export gold to the United Arab Emirates through Nairobi?
No. How can the government be involved in smuggling? If there was such a thing, wouldn't it appear in the records of our exports if we were exporting that gold?
Facilitating?
No, we don't.
You are not facilitating them?
Yeah.
But recently an aircraft was bombed. We know about that in Nyala. A Kenyan pilot was killed. The aircraft is said to be ferrying weapons for the RSF.
You've just answered yourself. You've said it was said.
Yes.
Do you have evidence?
That's why I'm going to the question.
Do you have evidence?
As government, could you clarify that? Which is why you're here, Waziri.
There's no evidence.
To enable us. So first of all, let's talk about the aircraft. Mm-hmm. There was a Kenyan pilot killed?
Yes, it was in the media.
No, not what's in the media. Now I'm asking you as government. So was a Kenyan pilot killed in that aircraft?
Died, yes.
Okay. Who did the aircraft belong to?
Oh, no. That is a different matter. That is a subject of proper investigation.
Okay.
Yeah? Let's not go into speculation. Please.
So
in all fairness...
Okay, so so this is me asking, so that they can... Because, Waziri, you're here to enable us put the rumours to rest.
Yes.
So the aircraft...
We can't go into falsehoods and innuendo here.
I'm asking the question so that you can help dispel the falsehoods and the innuendo. So the aircraft did not belong to the RSF and was not said to be ferrying weapons?
Yes. As far as we are concerned, no.
It wasn't?
Yes.
But you just said investigations are being done and you're not here.
Yes, as far as we are concerned, no.
Okay.
Yes.
And if the investigations you say prove otherwise?
We are not in the business of smuggling arms. Neither are we in the business of smuggling gold. By the way, Kenya has a history here. I was in Treasury when the whole Golden Bag saga came in, and it was all about fictitious claims and exports around gold. We are not in the business of entering into that kind of trade.
So the reverse is also true. The UAE is known to support RSF, so there is no chance, or is there, that there is maybe some type of government-to-government arrangement where the Kenyan government is helping the UAE pursue its agenda in Sudan?
No, that is wrong, and I will not. I'm not holding brief for the UAE. I am the Minister for Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Kenya, and I do not speak for the UAE. They will speak for themselves.
While we stay on the matter of Sudan and what is going on there, the Human Rights Commission has condemned what they call, the Kenya RSF ties, and they say that that is undermining the efforts in the Sudan peace process. And they have been quite stinging, saying that when the RSF gathered here in February, to form a parallel government, you say it wasn't, that it violated Kenya's commitment to justice and accountability, not just in Sudan, but in the Horn of Africa region, and that at that time, the RSF were themselves conducting some heinous acts back in their country with over 400 people who were killed. They are saying that they're issuing a statement, which was a strong one, condemning any attempt by the warring parties to unilaterally declare a government here. And they said this is, interfering with the international law. This was signed, Waziri, by the Africans for the Horn of Africa Initiative, Atrocities Watch Africa, Betty Murungi, Civic Freedoms, Grace Agenda, the Human Rights Commission, and so many other CEOs, including the Pan-African Lawyers Union, castigating the work. So this is coming from civil society, this is coming from the government in Sudan, which you say, because it's not declared by the AU, Kenya is a part of the AU, and you are saying the legitimacy of that government is in question. Correct?
Absolutely.
All right. So what does Kenya say then? I mean, when you want to be an arbiter in a peace process, right? You've got civil society actors who are speaking against it. You've got the Sudan government or General Burhan, as it were, saying Kenya is not a neutral arbiter. Is this not a moment, perhaps, Waziri, for some reflection to say, could there be a way in terms of creating a perception? And perception, as you know, is important, perhaps even more so in the world of diplomacy, to the extent that Kenya can no longer play the...
So that I can appreciate where you are coming from.
Yeah.
Do you yourself support Burhan?
I am not the government of Kenya.
No.
So I have no views on that.
The reason I'm asking you... Because your line of questioning is as if you've taken a position.
I am trying to understand your line of thought and understanding. And this is because you are the cabinet secretary in charge of foreign affairs
and I have told
are a civil servant. And so your statements and that of government have a much bigger play internationally. Not mine, I'm an ordinary citizen.
And that is why I've told you precisely, no government was formed here. Okay?
I'm asking what.
And then two, I have said Kenya's position, and I'm pronouncing Kenya's position, a military solution will not work in Sudan. The conflicting parties have to get to a negotiating table. That is the position.
My question was about the perception that it creates and to what extent that concerns you, if at all, in terms of then the role that Kenya can continue to play in terms of building peace in Sudan, which, as you say, is important. Waziri, does the perception that Kenya is taking one side over the other, does that concern you at all? That was my question.
Do you know there's a perception that other countries are also taking sides?
But this is Kenya, and I'm speaking to the Kenyan minister.
So I want to put it in context. I don't want to name other countries that have taken different positions on different issues. We have to help the Sudanese people build trust in a dialogue process.
But some of them, one side of that doesn't believe
but people are
in
dying.
The process.
Yvonne, we are talking here in this prestigious studio People are dying. It's about there's need for dialogue.
Is Kenya the one that can lead that dialogue, considering everything that's been said?
Kenya can contribute in its small way to get them to dialogue.
All right.
All right? If for instance...
Do you think the perception is a stumbling block to that dialogue process?
If, for instance, we were able to bring and persuade RSF or any other of the different parties, because there are many conflicts and there are many groups, by the way. It's not just the two. The two are prominent because they're the ones with the military might. But there are so many other groups. If we can contribute in getting these people to stop fighting and get to a negotiating table, I think that would be a valuable contribution. Ultimately...
Do you think you still can, with everything that's been said about Kenya?
You don't run away from a process. You help people get together. Shall I go to another angle, just to give you an example? We were here, people were saying there's a problem. What have you done with DRC? People forgot that the Luanda process was about two nations conversing. The Nairobi process was about encouraging inter-Congolese dialogue, led by Uhuru on one side and Lorenzo in Angola. Okay? We were accused and vilified that why is this government encouraging the talk to a different group? Those were inter-Congolese dialogue. Now, tell me what has happened in Qatar. The same people that they were saying we should not have talked to or we should not encourage them to talk, they are now telling them, we are happy that you're talking in Qatar. They've gone and signed agreements in other countries. Now, for as long as it's bringing peace, we are happy with it. But doesn't it tell you something? That somebody must talk to the different conflicting parties. That's all.
The U.S. is unhappy, Waziri.
No.
The U.S. Senate is unhappy.
Maybe that's better. Because you said the U.S. is unhappy, and I've told you no. Okay? First of all, let's put it in context. And I repeat, we are a sovereign state. It's absolutely important. There's a famous saying that the Englishman's heart is his castle. So no matter our size, no matter the state of our nation, there's one thing we must always safeguard: the sovereignty of our state and our nation. The right to choose our friends and how to work with our friends. That is a principle that we must always uphold. Even as we speak, the superpowers are talking. If you go into the trade numbers, who is the biggest trading partner today of those two big superpowers? The biggest trade is literally between them. And they've just met in Europe to reconcile their differences on matters of trade. All right? So when Kenya engages or talks, it should not be taken out of context. And by the way, I have written a letter formally to the senator explaining Kenya's position and getting him to appreciate the context in which the statements he's alluding to were made. First of all, President Ruto is the chairman or the African Union champion on matters climate change.
Yeah.
President Ruto is the champion on matters of reform of the African Union. President Ruto was the co-host for the World Bank here in Nairobi to raise funds for the IDA 21 replenishment, speaking on behalf of the 75 IDA recipient countries on the African continent and beyond the African continent. And in that meeting, they talked of the need to look at the international financial architecture so that it can be more accommodative to the needs of the 75 IDA countries. That is a global issue. Aspects about climate change, the impact, and whether Africa is getting the right return in terms of carbon credits and so forth, is a global context. And these issues that need to be canvassed, and who are members of the World Bank? Everybody is a member of the World Bank. And in fact, out of tradition, you will find that the head of the IMF is normally nominated from the European countries. And the United States normally would be the one identifying who would be the president of the World Bank. So this is a unique moment. Okay? So the context in which it was made was not right. Okay? So I've written to explain, and I've invited him, if he pleases, to come to Kenya and have a more detailed conversation.
All right.